thank you very much, Skylar, in particular, for the hard work you do behind the scenes to bring these things together. And I think this will be an interesting one because Becca Jenkins, you can see there, who I met 12 months ago, has been doing a lot of hard work since her attendance at last year's summit. So, Becca, perhaps we can start by telling us what happened in that workshop when you attended last year's summit. What was your experience in summary?
It was a eureka moment, really, an aha. The lights came on, right? And also like a duh, this makes so much sense moment. I can't believe I missed this all along. So your workshop was the first time that I had heard somebody say that you can think about standards in terms of the things that we actually make or the services that we provide and describing them. And this whole time I've been thinking about standards and the way people work. I had never thought
Uh,
about defining clearly what it is, what's good about what we make or the services we provide.
so let's go back a step. Where was, without divulging too much, of course, because we respect that, where was Cambridge at before Cambridge Air at? Or perhaps tell us a little bit about what you do, what Cambridge Air does, and
Yeah.
where was Cambridge Air at before you walked into that workshop?
So Cambridge Air Solutions, we are a second generation family owned company. We make commercial HVAC products, HVTV really products. So heaters, we make air turnover units, we make cooling units, semi-custom to custom shop. So each build is very different from the next. And we have been practicing what we call standard work in terms of like how people work. And
Uh,
everybody kind of has their own flavor for how we approach it. Anybody who's making them, some people develop it the same way, a lot of people don't. And it just, to me, from my perspective in the company, so I started actually on the shop floor 7 years ago as a CNC operator on second shift. So I was bending sheet metal. And then an opportunity came up for me to move into operations engineering, and I took that job. I was doing a lot of troubleshooting, a lot of standard work development. A lot of times when there was a quality issue, we said, okay, does standard work exist? Most of the time the answer was no. Okay, don't do a root cause analysis until you develop standard work. So I would do a lot of that work. And then through doing that, I started to see the importance of training and got introduced to TWI actually through Lean Frontiers through their skills lab. I attended that, was it last year, maybe 2 years ago? I can't remember exactly when, but I came back completely on fire. So we need job instruction breakdown sheets everywhere. We got to do this now, today, like right now, get started.
that seems to be
Um,
your nature to some extent.
kind of, I'm a little tenacious, which I get in my own way sometimes with that, but um, that was a mistake because like we were putting the cart before the horse and I kept running into that roadblock like, we need to do this, but I can't seem to get started.
Yeah.
Um, I couldn't figure out why. And then I came to the summit last year in Indiana and sat in on your workshop and it like eureka, aha, lights came
So,
on. This is why
so
I'm putting the cart before the horse.
good. I appreciate that. So I think what I'll do is I'll get you to hold there because you've talked about work, standard work. So I'm going to share my screen. And one of my biggest learnings in this is over the last sort of 5 years, I suppose, is the people's different definitions of the different terms. So I think it's probably appropriate. I'll bring this in now. So in 2019, 2020, a group from the Institute went to Japan and spent a week with Mr. Isao Kato, who was Ono's HR advisor, now released, and from what I'd seen with other eyes work. So you've mentioned standard work. I think it's probably pertinent right now to define those three. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I will spend probably 2 or 3 minutes. So first of all, let's look at the one on the left is work standards. So work standards are concrete statements about various work conditions, work methods, work management methods, and other precautions. They are generally organised into three categories: control, which is your output conditions; process or machine conditions; and operation or people conditions. So that's work standards. Then standard work is a term that refers to a specific task or job for which the content, sequence, timing, and outcome have been identified. And then this a key statement. Since the focus is on human motion, standard work is that description of that motion and its interaction with machine and materials. So now what follows is the key, if you like, to some extent. Standardized work is an end condition. So standardized work is not something that you pile on someone's desk. It's an end condition, and it's the end condition that exists in the workplace after work standards and standard work have been identified and taught, and both are being followed explicitly. So I'm going to add a little bit more to that. Cato said, if you want this end condition, which is what we're striving for, if you want this end condition, then you must get going with these. First, get going with these. Then you can evolve or move towards standard work. And there's good logic there, because if we're going to be clear on detailing human motion, which is what he said standard work covers, if we're going to be clear on detailing human motion, it stands to reason why we first must be very clear on what the human needs to get done. Such clarity lies within well-constructed work standards. So if we're going to be clear on this bit here, if we have well-constructed work standards, then it's easier to develop standard work. Once we then have both, we can move towards standard work, which is where training and a number of other things come in. So I guess the next question there, if you look at those definitions, Becca, you were talking about standard work. Prior to walking into that workshop, what were you thinking standard work was?
Um,
Do you recall?
yeah, I mean, standard work as we define it here at Cambridge, like it's not quite that concrete.
Sure.
It's just go and watch what people do, or if you are a person who does the work, just write down what you do. Sometimes it includes cycle time, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it has elements of safety, sometimes it doesn't. It's looser here.
It's looser than that. Yeah.
It's just get it out of your head and onto paper is the
Okay.
goal. So that was my understanding. Is
Sure.
something's better than nothing, right?
So you recognized through that workshop and that simulation, and I remember you were one of the doers in the simulation, you
hmm
suddenly recognized the implication of work standards and their power, if you like. And tell us a little bit about that. What was it that made you think, bang, that's where we need to go?
Can I talk about red card, green card?
Of course you can.
Yeah, that was it hit me like a ton of bricks. Um,
Right.
if you don't have clearly defined expectations, then your definition of not good is subjective, and varies depending on when things are being looked at. I believe that's red card.
You just hold there. I'll share my screen again and show people what Becca's talking about. So what Becca's talking about, just read it again off the screen if you like.
Yeah, if you don't have a clear expectation of what good or normal looks like, then your definition of not good or abnormal is subjective and varies depending on who, what, and when things are being looked at.
Right. So when you heard that statement and saw that written, that's when you thought, oh, hang on, that's where we are
In some areas,
in
yes,
some things.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I put that up anywhere we work, people recognize that instantly. I found that really powerful, that people can very, very quickly recognize that. And so then the bridge there is between the red and the green, which is where we want to be, is work standard. So that was the bit that you grabbed and latched onto.
Yes.
And we're able to illustrate that through the simulation. So tell us
Right.
what happened then. What happened after that? Because how many people has this happened to? You go to a summit, you attend a workshop, and you think, bingo, there it is. But then you walk out, and 2 weeks later, it's all forgotten about. But I know that has not happened with you and at
No.
Cambridge. So tell us what happened after
Yeah,
that.
I became a really squeaky wheel. Uh, so I came back and I shamelessly stole I showed it. I was like, you guys have got to see this. Anybody who would listen, guys, that red card was happening. I started thinking about it in terms of the operator. What does red card mean for our supervisors? What does red card mean for our engineers and our problem solvers? And it was, I don't know, it's such a simple idea, red card, green card, that is, I was like, everybody's got to start thinking about this. And so
So just
we,
just hold there a minute,
yeah,
because Jenna Smith from Hunter Engineering Company has asked a question when she submitted her registration, and when that was, what strategies can be used to gain employee buy-in and then adherence to standardized work processes. But the first question is, what strategies can be used to gain employee buy-in? So I think that was a strategy you used, that red green
yeah,
poster. Is that right? Tell us.
yes, it is. But it was also important to get all of those personas in the room, get the people doing the work in the room with the supervisor, with the engineer, with the supervisor's supervisor, right? And ask that question: how does this condition, red card condition, affect how you do work at Cambridge?
Yeah,
How do
good
you think
question.
it
Great
affects
question.
our customer? Like, if this is existing, how do you think this, just simple questions, and get
Yeah.
them thinking about that. And you could see the light bulbs coming on in the room.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, we're talking to each other about, we were looking at a specific product that we make, not even a complete product. It's like a piece that goes into a product, right? And we had that team assembled. And now all of a sudden, they're talking to each other about what the normal condition is, and having good, robust conversation about it, just because I asked a couple of questions
I think you've
about
used
red
some
card, green
key.
card, right?
I think you've used some key words, and that's what I see is good, robust conversations start to develop. It doesn't mean they all agree straight off, but what happens is people have the right start having the right conversations about the right stuff.
Right. And one key thing that I want to address here is that it's so important that you get those people involved so that they don't
Yeah.
feel like this is happening to them, but they are
Yes.
actually a part of the conversation. They're more invested at that point, and it becomes more meaningful to them when they get to be a part of that conversation.
Sure, because and what I've heard you say there also is that when you what you're bringing into the room and you're working through is you've got an engine. You can be looking at the one thing in a production system, and you'll have the engineer's view, and then you'll have quality's view, and then you'll have the worker's view, and then you'll have the supervisor's view, and they are in red poster area. They're all different, and that's where we run into some difficulty. So the value, you're so right, the value of bringing all those views into the room and triggering a robust conversation, and the end product is a common view. Is that where we're coming from? Is that where we're
Yes,
heading? Yeah.
eventually. Yes,
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
Sometimes you gotta experiment to find, like, whenever
Absolutely.
things don't quite line up and you can't come to a good consensus in the room, we'll go out and experiment and figure out what the answer is. Like, it's simple.
Well, yeah. I mean, our
Yeah,
belief, and I'm sure you've experienced this, you will not come to a common agreement in the room. There's a routine you can follow, and you go out into the workplace and you follow that routine, and that will take you, and that will continue the robust conversations. So tell us a little bit what happened beyond that. You had you triggered this thinking within your company with those conversations. Then what happened?
so it's also important to understand that a couple of things were happening at the same time at Cambridge. I stepped into this new role back in January of last year, project manager of technical training, right? Because I came back from skills lab all on fire, got to have jibs everywhere. Let's create a position. Um, I interviewed for it. It was open to everybody. I want to, like, make that clear. It wasn't created for me, but I interviewed for it, got that position. At the same time, we recognized that we needed to focus and get some strategy around quality at Cambridge. And so um, a team was forming to um, start developing that strategy. Okay. So that's the team that I brought red poster, green poster to. And we took that and started kind of figuring out what our strategy would be at Cambridge based on a standardized work system.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Well, actually, um, no, I'll hold that question. There's a question from Sandro Castro that I'm going to ask, but I think the timing's not right. So keep going. Then what happened? You had that meeting in the room with the quality people, with all those
Mhm.
different people, and you could see that the recognition was there, as yours was. So then what happened?
So the ownership sort of moved from me to our operations engineering leaders. We have two sites. We have Chesterfield and Wentzville, and there's operations engineering leaders there. And we determined that they would kind of lead the charge with this. And so um,
How
it's
did you get
also
buy-in there? Because that's often where these things struggle a bit. How did you get buy-in transferring from the first group to operations, where the ownership does need to sit
oh,
for this stuff? If operations don't own what we're talking about, then it ain't going to stick.
right. So that was tricky. It was
Yeah, I'll bet it was. It's
yeah.
rarely is it not.
Because we're also doing this on our own, right? Which
Yeah,
I
sure.
do not recommend. Find somebody who can mentor you through this because it's been messy, right? And you and I knew that. We knew it was going to
Yeah,
be messy. But
yeah,
we've had to do it on our own for reasons, for good reasons. And
yes,
it's been a lot of I would say trial and error, right?
yeah,
And push back people, and allowing people to push back and ask those hard, challenging questions. Are we sure about this? And then at times, even myself and maybe one or two other people on the team could see something coming. Like, how do I phrase this? This is a really good question. We could see what we thought was going to happen, and we
yes.
had to ask ourselves, do we intervene and like put our feet in the ground and make a stand, or do we let this happen, right?
Yeah,
do
yeah,
we let
yeah.
do we let this unfold and create
See
a,
what
a
we
learning
learn.
environment? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
And it was that was the key, was okay, go out and try that thing and then come back. And that was the key. Go out and try doing an audit before we get our expectations clear. Go out and try this
So who
before
was
this
doing
and
that?
see what
Who was doing that?
happens.
The operations people.
Operations engineering.
Yeah, right. Sandra, and this might tie in. Sandro Castro from IEHP has asked, "What are your thoughts on the people in the process defining what their standard work layout and format is?" And perhaps let's not go that far, but what's your thoughts on the people in the process actually defining their standards?
They have to be involved.
Yes.
Absolutely. They've got the knowledge. They know how the work gets carried out. Now, this is the other interesting thing, and this is a great question. One thing that we experienced whenever we started, we had one or two operators in the room, and this happened with multiple teams. We have 4 pilot teams going strong right now on this stuff, and in 2 of them, we got the same response. We had more than one operator in the room, and they had different views on how to get the work done. And
Yeah,
they,
right.
like, at some point, they realized, oh, we're talking about like actually doing things the same way. And that's like, they were like, oh no, that's not okay. You're taking away my autonomy over my process. And I don't like
Ah.
that. I don't like that. And so we had to give the leader a chance to say, no, 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 that's not what we're doing. We just understand that there's probably one best way to carry out this process so that we get this good output that we're talking about. And we want you guys to be a part of deciding that and helping us figure that out. Um, and
So
once
I'm going to share my screen again because you've said something that's important. So we start with these output work standards. How difficult did you find? So we're starting down here rather than
mhm,
jumping up to writing what people do. We're starting with being very, very clear on what the output is. Were people struggling to come to the same place on even that, or not really, or was that
I would
pretty?
that wasn't the struggle. It was for us, it was understanding that we're describing the thing and
Yeah,
not what
right.
people do,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because that
Okay.
was new to us.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
I think because of the newness of that, we were all
Struggling.
struggling, yes, but we were together in the struggle
Yeah,
at
right.
least.
Yeah,
And
that's
then it
good.
was again about figuring out what are the right questions to ask, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about it in terms of like nouns and adjectives, I think really
Yeah,
unlocked a lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
things. What are you looking at? And when you're
Yes.
looking at this thing, what are you looking for?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Where just simple questions.
So
It
the
always
key,
comes back to those
the,
questions. Sorry.
no, that's all right. The principle is start with the end in mind. So
Yes.
rather than just jump in, why are we here? Why are we running this machine? What do we want from running this machine? What start with the end in mind and let's
Right.
define that, or whatever the work cell is. Why are we here in this work cell? Start with the end in mind. So you
Absolutely.
once you introduce that, people were the conversations to get on the same page, were they difficult? They tended to flow, do you remember? Or
No, they tended to flow because we were having fun at that
yeah,
point.
right. Yeah,
And we
good.
had the right people in the room, so it wasn't just we had the people in the room who could answer the questions that were
Yeah, right.
coming up because of that. Why does this thing have to be this way? Well,
Yeah,
we
right.
have customer service in the room who's got the customer perspective, and we have engineers in the room who know what the design intent was, and we can start answering these questions. And honestly, the energy in the room was fun at that
Yeah,
point.
good.
Like maybe we don't know everything, but we're having a good time.
So this ties in. Robert Rui from Mountain Country Foods has written, asked any suggestions to get a quick, convincing win with TWI standard work to get the ball rolling. So perhaps it's there. Is it red, green poster? And then let's start discussions on the output. Let's
Yep.
just start with that. What's your comment? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And so a simple, quick exercise. If you have, I would say, figure out what's causing you the most grief. Like, where's your biggest red poster situation? What keeps you up at night? And then ask the right people. By the right people, I mean your operators, your process owners, your engineers, whoever your right people are. Describe the good condition of this thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're going to do that. They're going to come up with this is what I did early on. They're going to do that. They're going to come up with some statement, but then there's going to be a lot of subjectivity in it. And then you
Sure.
start just asking questions about that. Well, what does this word mean to you? What
Yeah.
does this word mean to you? And then ask them to redefine those. And eventually what you end up with is a very clear statement. And people that I think will get the ball rolling. It's
This is
fun.
this might
Yeah.
test your memory a little bit, and back out if I'm pushing too hard. But do you remember an example of that subjectiveness in any of your earlier conversations? Do you
Ooh,
remember? Can you recall? Because it does come up quite a bit.
I would have to look at,
No, it's all right.
yeah.
If there's not one that stuck out, and an example that often that we get is correct. It needs to be correct. No, it needs to be tightened correctly or tightened to a
Uh,
correct strength or something like that. So
I
the
see what
word
you're saying.
correct,
Yeah.
is a flag, because correct to the engineer and correct to the quality person and correct to the operator and correct to the supervisor may have four different interpretations.
Yep.
So it's not a great example, but it's sort of what we're fishing for there. Dave Hill has have you has noted or got a question from Cornerstone Building Brands around the integration of leader standard work with this stuff. Has it started to filter in that direction at all, or with your site?
So we are going very slow. I think maybe not in relative, my mind, we're going really slow. And we're just now starting to see and think about this. Like, how important is daily process confirmation? Where
Yeah,
does it
right.
fit in?
Yeah, right.
It hasn't been written, I would say, into leader standard work just yet. I know a lot of our supervisors already are doing this. They're going out to the floor, they're watching processes, they're checking products, but it's just not like a standard
Yeah, yeah.
cohesive, not, I wouldn't say cohesive, it's not standard yet.
You can see it
Uh,
coming though.
we can see it coming and we're having conversations about it. We understand that it's important. We
Sure.
just don't know how to operationalize it just yet. We're figuring
Yeah,
it
fair
out.
enough. I think we've got time for one last question, Meg, and it's one that Meg Brown has just submitted. Where do you start with output standards? What part of the process? Is it always the end, or do you have sub-processors who have their own output standard?
Is that so is this for me, a question for me? Because
It's a question for you. What was your experience?
um I think it's that answering that question, what keeps you up at night? Where's the biggest red poster? Like, where do we need to start?
Yes.
Um, and maybe it's the end of the process, maybe it's not the end of the process. For us, it made sense in one area to start at the end of the process in our functional testing. What is a good output after an M unit is tested? An M
Yeah.
is one of our unit types. In another scenario, we had a leader in customer service who said my team is constantly underwater during busy season. We sell heaters, obviously. We're more busy in the cold months than we are in the hot months. Nobody buys a heater in the summertime. So during our peak season, our customer service group is underwater with calls. They can't catch up. And he said, you know what, I want to change that. How do we change that? Becca, can you help me from a training perspective? And so that's a completely different area of the business. It just
Yeah, yeah,
depends
yeah.
on
Right.
what the need is. You need to assess the
Yes.
need.
Well said. So I'm heading over to your part of the world, not a week tomorrow, and we're doing a week of work standards with McKee Foods, and they've just gone through that exercise of identifying where we're going to focus our practice. So, and it is on part of the line. It's on certain operations within the line, and they went through they did an analysis with their operators and frontline leaders about what causes you grief, what causes you grief on this line, in terms of setup, for example. And so they've ended up in midpoints on the line in 3 or 4 different places rather than an end product. So I think that answers that question as well. Look, our time's up, or very pretty close to being up. The opportunity for all of you is that Becca and Cheryl Jekyll and myself are going to be running a very similar workshop to what Becca attended a year ago. We're going to be doing that on the April the 1st, isn't it, Jim? If you're still there, Jim or Skylar.
Yep.
Monday, April the 1st.
No, April or March 31st, Monday,
March.
March 31st.
Sorry, Monday, March 31st. So we're going to be running that same workshop, similar, the same simulation, but Becca will be there as well. And rather than half an hour, you're going to have, if you attend that workshop, you're going to have plenty of time to participate and ask lots of questions and pick the brains of someone who's had 12 months or 10 months crack at this stuff, being Becca. And as you can see, she's pretty enthusiastic about it. So I really encourage you to consider registering. The other thing I'll do is at the end of this, I'm going to send Skylar the 2 slides that I showed. And Skylar, when you send out the link to the recording, I'd like you to send a PDF of those 2 slides.
Awesome. I can do that.
Very good. So thank you very much, Becca. Appreciate your time and your enthusiasm. I've learned a lot through what you've done as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Oscar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
No worries.
everybody. Thank you, Becca.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Oscar. Again, just a quick reminder, you can see them live at the TWI and Kata Summits coming up in April, and their workshop is on March 31st. We will see you all again soon. Bye-bye.